This is Duke University.
Okay, we're back. Unlike Dan, who knew most of you, I don't know most of you, which means most of you are interested in energy but less interested in entrepreneurship, or at least already heard about the entrepreneurship program.
Emerging interest in entrepreneurship.
So that's good. So we have two more sessions. One is the panel, and the second is the stellar presentation that you're going to see from Matt and Will shortly. And I thought what we would do is try to create a discussion that helps you think about entrepreneurship in case you happen to be interested, even though I don't know you. So I want you to keep three questions in mind. And you know, it's a complicated subject, but we're gonna circle through these three questions more or less twice. The first one is, where are the opportunities for entrepreneurship? And which may stimulate a discussion of how would you characterize those opportunities and what are you looking for. The second is, what's the right business model to construct to address those opportunities? We may spend less time on that in the panel, but certainly in the case of the Hightower presentation, I want you to think about that. And the third question is, where's the money coming from? Who are the investors? What's the nature of investment, etc. And another thing that I think our panel can address. So we've got an excellent panel, a couple of entrepreneurs, a couple of investors. And you've seen all the bios. What I'm going to ask you guys to do is sort of say what you do in as sort of a setup for answering the first question, rather than spend the first half hour having you give little personal bios. So what I'd like to do is have you guys talk about where do you think the opportunities for entrepreneurship are. I'm going to start with the two entrepreneurs on the panel, and maybe you could say a little bit about your entrepreneurial effort, how you hit on it, and sort of some thoughts on where these folks might look. So Luke, since I know you first, why don't you start?
Okay, super. I'm Luke Fishback. I'm the CEO and founder of a Durham-based startup called PlotWatt. We are, the simplest way to explain it is we're Mint.com for energy. We take the energy consumption from your smart meter and figure out what's happening at the appliance level, and then help you to cut your electricity bill. I think that maybe as an entrepreneur, I'm the worst person to answer this question, because I'm clearly married to where I think the opportunity is. But when I look out at the kind of clean tech space in general, where I see a kind of massive unexplored opportunity is in kind of energy efficiency, kind of at large. That is where most of us could go home and make a measurable difference right now. And when we add all of those little pieces up, it's absolutely enormous. It's bigger than the potential of so many of the other renewable sectors that we're kind of talking about and investing in. And I think that companies like O-Power are a great validator of that. This is a company that's delivering, 2 or 3%, but they're doing 2 or 3% reduction across millions of homes, and they've built a nicely profitable business, kind of in that space. So that's where we find ourselves. What we do is we deliver something that looks more like 20% reduction to all of our users, and we do it in a massively scalable way. The way that I got into it personally was solving my own problem. So it's as simple as big electricity bills. What do we do about it? Let's solve that problem.
Very good. John?
I'm John Morrison. I'm the COO of Strata Solar, which is a solar design and installation company headquartered in Chapel Hill. And I think the biggest opportunity is similar to what Luke said, is in how we use and manage electricity. This country, and I think this globe, is facing a looming, what may be a crisis around electricity. We use more and more of it for more and more things, and it's going to become increasingly expensive to produce it. And in that setting, where the demand only seems to be going up, and the availability of it is going to be more difficult, I think there's huge opportunity. Efficiency, I think, is a big area. If somebody can crack that nut for the residential consumer, they're off to the races. I spent a decade trying to do that with an organization I was with previously called Enhanced Energy, and never was successful. But if somebody can do it, it's huge. The other area is in what is frequently referred to as the smart. You heard Steve mention that to some extent. I think the application of information technology to our energy use, I think will have huge implications for us in a dramatically different way in which all of us think about energy and use energy, and how the utilities that provide it get it to us.
Do you want to say just a bit about Strata Solar?
Yeah, if you want a solar system on your house, come to us. We'll put one in. We also work with large commercial customers and with utilities. So we do everything from residential scale, a 5 kilowatt system, up to multi-megawatt utility ground mount solar system. We also do thermal hot water on a residential scale. So both photovoltaic and hot water. Our founder is an individual who comes out of the direct marketing business and is an absolute deal maker. This is one of the reasons I joined the company. And my job is to figure out how to make his deals work. We just put them together. But it's a fascinating arena right now, because the way that many people respond to this issue of energy and what can I do is they immediately go to, I want PV on my house. And while I'm happy, or on my business, or while I'm more than happy to sell them that, what they really should do first is efficiency.
David, you want to?
Sure. I'm with SJF Ventures, and I went to do, many years ago, my first venture was an energy venture. It's called SunShares. It was an early passive solar enterprise, which became a recycling enterprise, which is in itself an energy conservation activity. But what we do now is invest in growth stage, Cleantech, positive impact companies, and clean energy companies. And we are, I think I would echo a lot of Stephen's comments. We are definitely more commercialization, capital efficient. We're a fairly small fund, especially compared to GE. So we're looking for those opportunities that can scale with 3 to 10 million in capital instead of the 10 to 100 million. So, and in terms of places for opportunity, I'd echo what Luke and John have said. I think about sort of buildings, and so it's HVAC efficiency. We've looked at interesting technologies there, lighting, obviously the LED lighting transformation, windows and intelligent windows, advanced materials, IT and smart buildings. There's a whole bunch around the built infrastructure. And then there's transport. And it's been hard for us to find something in transport because there's the biofuels boom, and kind of fuels just didn't seem to make sense for a small and capital efficient fund. Electric vehicles, advanced batteries, mass transit, car sharing and IT around intelligence transport. We've looked at some there. So there's opportunity there. It's harder to see where to invest, I think, than in the built infrastructure. And then the third area is kind of product and service. It's sort of so it's just manufacturing, industrial, data centers. We've got investment in energy efficiency in data centers. So it's those are the areas, and I think we're particularly interested in those kind of niche applications that are less well known and are applying IT or advanced materials and really solving a problem. For example, in an industrial manufacturing setting, it's just for low-hanging fruit, going back to the efficiency comments. I guess the last thing I'd say is in smart grid, we've been looking at infrastructure upgrade and repair, remote sensing technologies, things that have ROI today in terms of repairing grid faults, and then enable the grid to use the intelligence of a broader smart grid application. And that applies also to transport and building infrastructure, sort of the upgrade of all of our infrastructure, and the upgrade is going to be required. How do we use technology to do that much more efficiently, given our public invested dollars for infrastructure is very limited in the next decade. So those are some areas.
David, thanks. I'm going to give you another chance, Steve, but let me just maybe add a little twist on the question. I mean, it's a complicated question, but let me just ask you to think about 2 different aspects of it. One thing that constitutes an opportunity is that there's large pain. That generally means severe pain felt by a lot of people, and that's the market side. The other is there has to be a solution that can be delivered by a really small band of people. Sometimes it takes an army to change huge systems. That's very hard to do if it's you and somebody else in a garage. Sometimes it's something that can be addressed by by a small company. Maybe GE is the army that's managing a transformation, and you put a little piece into it. But sometimes there are these, we look at the energy problem and say, oh my God, we can change civilization. That's hard for a startup to do. I think the two examples you see here are, I've got a little bit that I can bite off and chew as a startup, and I can grow from that. And Steve, I know you gave us your flavor, but maybe you could say a little more about the opportunities.
Sure.
And maybe.
Well, I definitely would echo some of what you heard here. We do think there's a lot of opportunity around the smart grid, around energy efficiency. Particularly, a lot of those are fairly capital efficient opportunities. You don't need to build giant industrial plants or giant factories and things like that. And then that makes it easier to scale something up quickly. Another area where we see a lot of activity is in people who are making incremental improvements to pieces of the value chain. So what do I mean by that? It's one thing to say, well, I'm going to get in the business to make solar panels, which there are hundreds of companies making solar panels. It's another thing to go in there and say, well, here's a step in the way they make solar panels that I can make better, cheaper, and that's something that's really could be. Maybe it's an incremental improvement. It's not solving the whole problem, but it's also something that can be deployed much more rapidly, because I can go and I say, all right, I know what the problem is. It's very well defined. I know who my customers are. That's very well defined. I know what the specs are. I just need to deliver it. So don't be afraid to look at things like that. But, maybe it doesn't seem like it's world changing, but actually you can create a lot of value in something like that in a relatively efficient way. And the third thing I'd say is, as much focus as there is on clean tech and energy efficiency, don't forget about conventional energy. There is a tremendous amount of technology in the oil and gas business, and lots of opportunities to improve it. And yes, you've got companies like Schlumberger and Exxon playing there, but you might be surprised by how many startups there are out there with new technology for all sorts of things, visualization of seismic data and drill bits and processing and so forth. And these are enormous markets. The United States is using something like $10 billion of oil a day, just by itself. Enormous markets, where you can potentially have a big impact on, maybe not saving the world, but making the world more efficient, cleaner, and more economic.
Great, thanks, Steve. I'm going to take one or two questions from you guys if you have in a second, but maybe first, anything brilliant that you forgot to say the first time around that you want to add at this point?
I have just one quick thing to say. With respect to the question about being a scrappy little startup and solving a big problem, I think that for an early stage venture, we have benefited from solving a problem that doesn't require a PhD to understand. And so when you're looking for seed stage capital, if you're solving a problem that doesn't require a really sophisticated investor in order to really kind of get behind it, then that has been just a huge favor to us. The one other thing is that all investors understand IP, and the degree to which you can find an opportunity in which there is IP to be created, it proved to be more helpful than we understood out of the gate.
Anybody want to make Duke proud? Yes.
Are there any specific opportunities you saw or you have seen in the downstream side of conventional energy? Besides, energy efficiency and those incremental improvement of the
You mean
value
like
chain?
refining and marketing and things like that?
Refinery, gas stations.
Sure.
Those,
So I'll give you an example. So there's a company actually based not too far from me in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that has come up with a better catalyst for catalytic crackers in refineries. So the way you make gasoline is you take crude oil, it goes in the refinery. You essentially some of it you can just sort of distill. You boil off different fractions at different temperatures, but typically if you just do that, you make so much gasoline and you get a lot of heavy, tar and stuff like that isn't really very valuable. And refineries have something called a catalytic cracker that basically takes heat and pressure and catalysts and takes those big long chain hydrocarbon molecules and breaks them up into smaller pieces so that you can take, instead of making, some gasoline and some diesel fuel and some jet fuel and a whole lot of heavy fuel oil that nobody really wants and isn't worth very much, you can make a lot more of the lighter products that are much more valuable. And these guys have come up with a catalyst that basically, increases the yield that you get of gasoline and diesel fuel, which are the most valuable fractions by a significant amount. So that's an example of innovation that we've seen.
A follow-up question: is there any non-technology related innovations?
Sure. I mean, there are business model innovations. So I heard Jigar Shah is very long, right? So he was the founder of a company called Sun Edison, co-founder of Sun Edison. And what their innovation, that was not a technology innovation, right? Their innovation was saying that people don't really, that people might buy more solar systems if they could, buy kilowatt hours instead of buying solar panels. So that wasn't a technology innovation. That was an innovation in terms of business models and financing around a technology that somebody else did.
And then we'll take these two questions and we'll move on. So go ahead.
Sure. Another question for Stephen, actually. And it touches on a little bit on what Josh said, but I found it really interesting how you describe looking for ways to improve, add value in an existing value chain. And I'd like to know your thoughts on if there would be any difference in how you would approach, like, let's say somebody comes to you with a really great business idea. And there's only one thing different about it. It's an improvement in GE's value chain versus an improvement in, some other company's value chain, for instance. Would there be any difference in the way that you'd evaluate an idea with that in mind?
I guess what I'd say is, first of all, there are some ideas that are not really, you can't build a company around. I mean, there are features or there are, incremental improvements to something that's never going to be. So if you've come up with a better way for, a good example, you come up with a better way to cool the blades in big gas turbines, that's great. That might be a great idea, but there are 3 companies that could buy that, and you can't really build. You're not going to build a company to go and build heavy-duty gas turbines in order to commercialize that innovation, right? You're basically going to license that idea to GE or Siemens or Alstom, maybe even Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Those are the only people that ever use it. So that's an example where you just can't build a company with something like that. And we see those from time to time. People have interesting ideas that just don't seem like they can create standalone big companies. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes. So I think to interpret his question, part of his question is, you almost have access to a captive customer, or at least you have special insights into a customer set, and is that leveraged at all in your evaluation?
Well, I guess really Well, so first of all, my point about looking for things that kind of fit into existing value chains is you think about where is the risk. You've got the technology risk. Is it going to work? How much is it going to cost? You've got the kind of the execution risk. Do you have the right people to get the job done? And there's the market risk. Is the market going to be there when the technology is ready, and what's the economics going to be, and so forth. So one of the advantages of making an incremental improvement to an existing market is that I don't have so much market risk. I know it's already a big market, and I know who the customers are, and I know what the specs are. I don't have to create all that. It's great to be Facebook and create a whole new idea that nobody ever thought of, but that's really hard. And for every Facebook that succeeds, there are 100 guys who never get anywhere. So it de-risks a venture quite a lot to try and plug into something existing like that. So the example I use is refinery technology. Billions of dollars are spent on cat cracker catalysts every year. You can come up with a better mousetrap for that one little piece. That's worth a lot. It's a big industry. And in terms of how we kind of evaluate things, that lower risk makes it a more attractive investment. You can commercialize it faster, and ultimately that's pretty important, because we're a public company, so we have to care about things like net income. But most investors, all they care about is cash-on-cash returns and IRR. And the sooner you get them their return, the happier they are. And so they like that.
Thanks. Any of you guys want to comment on any of this?
Oh,
go ahead, Dave.
I could throw in another, sort of something that we haven't talked about, but it's the role of Asia and China and Korea in Cleantech. And since we have such an international audience, I think one of the things we saw in solar, as an example, we've invested in downstream solar and project developers, et cetera. We didn't invest upstream in thin film or the variety of breakthrough concentrated technologies because partly we're smaller from the capital intensity issues, but I can't say we saw as much China coming as it has, but we saw it coming, a little bit. And so I think one of the things we're interested in is sort of what makes sense in the U.S. as a cleantech investor, because I think when you look at wind turbines, when you look at solar panels, when you look at capital intensive, somewhat labor intensive, but it's really the access to capital in Asia and the government sort of plans for cleantech, which particularly China and Korea have laid out 5-year plans, massive investments. And I think what we're thinking about at SJF is we don't want to fight that juggernaut straight on. It's just that we're not going to win. And so basically, if you can assume that with your solar panel prices are headed this way, and if integrators can take advantage of that, and you can plot where inverters are going, and you can think about what's the value-added technology element that I can add domestically, where does it make sense for U.S. entrepreneurial companies to play? And be more intelligent, and this is a research project we want to take on at SJF Institute, is sort of let's really understand what the planned Asian economies are doing so that we can kind of say, okay, where's American innovation fit? And where in a global supply chain, we don't want to compete there just like in IT and microelectronics. There's just a supply chain where it makes sense in the U.S. and where it doesn't. And a lot of VC has gone head-to-head, U.S. VC, particularly in upstream solar, and it's a battle there.
It's interesting because, and just to kind of build on that, if you walk around all the big solar factories in China, you see lots of big expensive, capital-intensive machine tools, and they're all made in Germany, and they all use the same tools. So yes, the Chinese have been fabulously, efficient at scaling this up and building it and really driving out cost, but it's not Chinese technology. And there is no technology differentiation there. It's all a cost game. So that's very different from the sorts of things that most investors are looking for.
But in electric vehicles and batteries and wind turbines now, I mean, they're coming after, what is it? Goldwind is. You guys are in wind turbines, are you?
I think the second largest manufacturer of wind turbines.
They're coming after you quick. I mean,
they are.
Yeah.
They are. But again, you look at the Chinese wind turbine manufacturers, and most of them have licensed designs from a couple of either U.S. or European companies.
Right.
It has not, at least until this point, been indigenous Chinese innovation. It's been scale up and a cost play, and also the fact that the Chinese are building a lot of wind farms, and it makes sense to build them in China.
Yeah.
Just to comment on the issue of market risk, I think is a little bit unique to the energy world. Much of the energy industry is very regulated, particularly on the electricity side. And I see a lot of folks who say, I'm going to do this, and it's about electricity and dealing. And what they don't understand is how to deal with utilities and the decision process that utilities go through that is so very different because they're a regulated industry or regulated business. And so if anybody, if anybody's interested in that arena, it's make sure you understand that market, because regulated industry is different than everything I ever learned about in business school.
And I think there's an old saying in the utility business, we're all utility customers, right? No, the utilities customer is the regulator. You guys are just the end users. It's a big difference.
It's a ratepayer.
That's right.
Corinne, did you still have a question? Right.
My question was along the lines of you said you're looking for less capital intensive, and then also IT and energy, kind of that nexus. And our generation is the one of social media, social gaming, social networking. To what extent do you see kind of energy converging with that type of world? And what type of startups have you seen in that area that you think could be really successful? What type of models?
Luke?
I say,
Yeah.
Luke's coming close to that.
Right, right, and I think there may be a component of plot watt that is.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we're certainly right in there, but we're getting a lot of interest from folks who really want to kind of play up the game dynamics of something like energy, who want to take our, who want to make, this game powered by plot watt, where you could take your physical environment and take it into the game world, where what if you were actually competing against your neighbors on how much energy you use? There's lots of kind of cool opportunity there, and the other thing that we're finding is a little bit of a surprise for us is the degree to which people lack a good avenue for bragging about how green they are. Right? So
You mean driving a Prius isn't enough?
No, because they have to brag about how many miles per gallon they get driving that.
So if you can give people a kind of a convenient way to I don't know to kind of wear that on their sleeve, then so far we've been getting a surprising amount of uptake from at least the early adopters.
From consumers or from investors or from both? Or?
So it's a particular kind of subset of consumer. People, the eco geeks to whom we cater.
Yeah.
They can't wait to tell the world about plot watt. And they can't wait to tell the world how much more efficient their refrigerator is than yours. Right? And the investors, I would say, some of the investors that we brought on our recent round of financing are very attuned to this. That's where they want to see plot watt go, is kind of getting plugged into the potential for social media and game dynamics.
I have a question. I guess following up on that, there's the sort of the need for efficiency before you start installing solar panels on the roof. With something like plot watt, it's not sequential that way, I would guess. There must be some kind of iterative process where you're not like do your energy audit, and go through step 1, 2, and 3 and kind of the old model, and then you can install plot watt and really optimize. I'm guessing it changes the whole process of the way that you optimize your home.
It does, because we're talking with Luke about making plot watt part of Strata Solar product offering.
Interesting.
We're going to a customer who is interested, first came to solar, said we want solar.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing that everybody fixates on. Said, well, let us include this. And we haven't done it yet, but when we do, I fully expect it. We'll put the solar system on, but the customer's biggest benefit will be from the knowledge they gain from the data and information that comes out of plot watt, and then they start making changes. And Corinne, to your question, I think your generation is much more attuned to having data and information readily available and then acting upon it in ways, for many of us who didn't grow up in that, social media age. We think about our utility and our electric use, and we have 12 data points a year, monthly bill. We're going to have how many minutes in a year?
With a 30-day lag, right?
Yeah, with a 30-day lag, and so, that having that information and the expectation that, I'll have that information, I'll do something with it, whether it's through a game or some other mechanism, I think will make a huge difference.
And you can see the other area is just location. I mean, all of the social media that's tied to where you are and mobile devices. And so thinking about, well, we've already seen sort of car sharing companies at Cardew. Kind of how do you recycle bank? Kind of how do you incentivize more environmental behavior that's tied to where you are and make things more efficient? I mean, it's just, I think we haven't even seen the promise of some of this technology as it tracks you around. So.
Okay, so let's move on to the second question. So if you remember, I said 3 basic questions. Yeah, no, I said those 2 questions. Sorry. So you can, but hold on to your question. It may still be relevant. But so I said, where are the opportunities? What's the business model? And where's the money coming from? We're going to skip the second question for this, although we'll reserve that and we'll beat up Matt and Will with that. And so let's talk about investment, and maybe, is there a valley of death in the world of energy, and how would you characterize it, and who are the investors to go after, and what's a reasonable pitch?
I'll start. I mean, as you've heard over and over and over again, energy is a capital-intensive arena, and certainly from our perspective in the solar business, it's really about project financing, not so much the equity of the business itself. but it's arranging project financing. And that is a real challenge, particularly in what is a relatively small, volume or small size projects that we get involved with. I mean, if we do a $10 million project, that's pretty big for us. Whereas that's pretty small for GE. And it's fine. And where do you find people who are willing to do those sorts of investments at that scale? And of course,
where do you find them?
There's a lot of high net worth individuals. There are increasingly a number of firms that basically go out and say, we're going to invest in this. And they go do their, they round up the money and then start looking for projects.
And what's the nature of the investment? Is it are they lending you the money? Is it?
It's typically an equity investment and a somewhat complicated lease structure with the underlying property owner using electricity or where the site's going to be located. So it tends to. It's also a good field for lawyers.
Accountants.
And accountants, right.
And so, well, Luke, we might as well round up. And now you're a more traditional VC kind of investment, sell equity. Why don't you say a little bit about it?
Yeah, so, we're I guess, a little bit unusual in that we're not a super capital intensive sort of startup. We're a scrappy little startup that can do a lot with a little, especially being based here in North Carolina. We did start with a real nice thing that we have available to us here in North Carolina, which is the Green Business Fund. So we started with grant funds from the state of North Carolina. We got a little bit of prize money from the Duke Startup Challenge too that gave us a teeny tiny little kickstart. So grant funding, and the one other thing that I wouldn't neglect here is actually having customers pay you for financing. It's a pretty neat thing, and we're finding we are a pre-revenue company, so far be it for me to talk that up too much, but utility companies are willing to pay, and we're getting we're getting a surprising amount of interest from utility companies that want to pay for pilot studies and that sort of thing.
So, David, maybe you could say a bit more about where you fit in the investing chain and people that invest before you and after you and your thoughts on that.
Well, I think since we started about a dozen years ago now, and you saw Steve's chart of Cleantech venture capital. So when we started, we were not only the only firm in the Southeast, one of the few in the country that did sort of cleantech environmental energy investing. And I think we've had an explosion, mostly based in Silicon Valley, a little bit in the Northeast. We're still in the Southeast, pretty rare. But they tend to be larger funds, and they have had a fascination with like sort of the coastal adventure sort of model, big bang, incredible technology bet sort of plays. And so I think that we are a little bit unique. And so in the value chain where we fit is companies that have gotten a few million to 20 million that need growth capital of 1 to 5. That's sort of our niche. So it's not the early stage. But it's also not it's not project finance, and it's not, and we're ideally looking for companies where that is their, hopefully, the only capital they need. So I'll use one recent example. We were talking about project development. We had led the Series A for community energy, which interestingly was a serial entrepreneurial team. They had done wind development, sold their company Iberdrola, came back out, and were doing solar development using those same skills, but have a current renewable energy power marketing business. So they had about 18 million in revenue already, but are launching the solar development on the 5 to 20 megawatt scale. So it had those elements of capital efficiency, corporate capital, which was separated from project capital, very clearly understood. For a team that had done it before, and a lot of the wind development skills a lot of the issues are similar to solar, and to some extent, solar development's easier than wind in many ways. So that's kind of our perfect fit. That we let a $6 million around there, where our fund put in a couple of million, and knock wood, that should, we hope that's all they need, or not much more. That's kind of our goal. So.
Steve, any more thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, a couple of thoughts. I'll probably focus. I mean, I'll probably focus more on the project finance side. But I kind of straddle both. From the venture side, GE is making. We're investing in kind of B round and later usually, so sort of second round of venture capital, alongside other venture capital firms. We're usually making relatively small investments, kind of $1 to $5 million per transaction, although we can certainly go above that if the situation warrants it. And we are looking for kind of technology-focused startups for the most part. And with a pretty broad appetite in terms of where it fits in energy, because GE has such a diverse interest there. But on the project finance side, that's actually, you probably got a sense, that's really kind of our bread and butter is a lot of project finance. We've been probably I think we've been the biggest single source of capital to equity capital to renewable projects in the country for the past 5 years. And on that side, it's absolutely right. It's finding project finance is difficult. Strangely enough, it's easier to finance a big project than a little one. Our project finance team, they pretty much don't do, they don't want to spend time on a project that's less than $20 million of our money. Because the opportunity cost is very high. It's as much work to do a $10 million deal as it is to do a $200 million deal. Except that on the bigger deal, you'll get 10 times as much net income for the company. So it's not, and we have no shortage of opportunity like this. It's not a difficult decision. Honestly, most people in the project finance business have that same kind of opportunity cost. So it is very difficult, and it is possible to aggregate a handful or even a large number of small projects into a bigger transaction. That does make it a lot more complicated. It adds a lot of complexity and transaction costs to the mix, which limits the number of people who are willing to do that. And I would say on the project finance side, there are half a dozen or so U.S. financial institutions that make equity investments in projects, solar projects, wind projects, things like that, to use the tax benefits that most developers don't have the taxable income to use. There are also probably another 10 or so investment funds that like to invest equity in pretty much ready to construct or completed operating projects. So typically they're sort of you can imagine a project as a partnership, and they're kind of the general partner who controls it, and then you might have a more passive financial investor like GE Capital that's kind of a limited partner but providing a very important part of the capital structure. And then there are also there's probably 20 or 30 mostly European and Japanese banks that make loans to projects, and typically those are syndicated, or maybe they're club loans where you have 2 or 3 banks get together from the beginning. And there aren't a lot of U.S. banks who are in that business these days. There are a couple, but they're usually looking for large deals, at least $20 million probably. They're looking for proven technology. The returns on a project investment generally aren't enough to make us want to take any technology risk. If we're not really confident it's going to work, we're not going to invest in it. And particularly for a lender, right? Because a lender has no upside. And the interest rate on a project finance loan is these days 6-7%. I'm not taking any technology risk for my 7% return. And we're also looking for contracted revenue for the most part. With a creditworthy counterparty. So if I've got a project, I want to build a solar farm in North Carolina, and I've got found I've got a big plot of land, and it's near a transmission line, and I've got the interconnection agreements, I've got control of the land, I've got the permits I need to build the thing, and I've got to get the technology from somebody reputable whose technology works and is proven. I've got to get somebody to construct it who knows what they're doing, knows how to build these things, will warrant its the cost and performance and schedule, delivery schedule, and then I want to sell my power to somebody like Duke Energy, who's a big credit-worthy utility, who I can be sure is going to be around to buy the power over the 20-year life of the contract. And that's crucially important. It's very hard to finance what people call a merchant project that doesn't have contracted revenues at the top line of the income statement. And if you can finance it, you're going to have to put a whole lot more of your equity into it in order to get the thing built as a cushion. So it's a very difficult game, honestly, for small entrepreneurs. Typically, what you see with small entrepreneurs is either they're guys who, as I said, have a track record. They've done this before with big companies, and people know that they have the sophistication and the skills to get it done. Or they do as much as they can, and then they take the project and they essentially sell it to somebody else who can get it over the finish line and get it built. And that is an entrepreneurial game. It's the barriers to entry in project development. If you want to be the person who's out there finding the land and getting the getting the contract, that's actually not that hard to do. But it's hard to get from that to having the project actually built and operating. There's a deep, wide, hot, dry valley of death in between.
Okay, great, thanks. So we have time for a few questions. I'm going to start, if you still have a question, I'll let you ask your question now. And I'll come back to this and then...
I had a question about the electric car market. I was reading about Tesla and how investors are afraid that the limiting factor is going to be lithium. And I just wanted to see what you guys thought about that, because it's such a rare resource.
My understanding is the brine deposits in Chile and Argentina are more than adequate to meet the needs. I mean, that's where most of our lithium comes from today. And they're deposits that have not yet even been tapped. They're a little bit remote, hard to get to. But technology of tapping them and then taking the lithium out of brine is pretty well known. So I'm surprised to hear that.
Yeah. No, I would say, I mean, because we've actually, aside from being owning a major lithium battery company, we've looked at others, lots of other battery companies as well as companies in the material space. And he's absolutely right. I mean, there's lots of lithium. It's actually not rare at all. I mean, economically mineable deposits are rarer, but there's still a lot of it out there. Lithium can be recycled. Battery doesn't consume lithium, right? So you can take the batteries out of old cars and recycle the lithium to make new batteries. And there are some people with some interesting technology that help reduce the use of lithium in batteries. Basically, get a better performing battery. You need fewer batteries, therefore less lithium. And there are people who are coming up with new ways to get lithium from new sources at potentially low costs. So I don't think we're not real worried about the availability of lithium.
So, did you still have a question? Yeah,
sure.
Go ahead.
So, when it comes to technology startups, there's a lot of iteration that takes place from the time an idea gets started and the product gets shipped. Is your experience similar with energy startups in your portfolio companies and in your companies? How do you contrast that?
With what? What do you
with your experience in the energy entrepreneurship space? Do you see folks?
There's a lot of what that happens?
Do you see folks iterating through the idea by the time they get to the end product?
Yeah. In our particular case, Fuqua certainly doesn't look like what it looked like when we first started, and I think it's very unusual that that's the case even in an energy startup that you end up with what you started with. Fuqua was originally Visible Energy, and Visible Energy was building a product that was doing optical meter reading and that sort of thing. And what we found kind of along the way is that there was a much more interesting problem to solve. And this is not to say that the problem that we're solving today with the customer that we have today is the one that we ultimately end up making amends on.
I would just say, what we see in the renewable space is products are out there. We are seeing that iteration, but it's iteration of product generation in the marketplace already.
Yeah, so this question, I guess, starts off with Steve. I know that venture capitalists generally invest locally for a number of reasons, but from your perspective, within GE, having the truly global footprint that GE has, does that change the game at all from you with your venture investing in terms of the markets that you're looking at?
Yes and no. I mean, it's true that GE has a global footprint, but we have 8 people making venture capital investments. And 2 of them are in San Francisco, and 1 of them is in Munich, and the rest of them are in Boston and Stamford, Connecticut. So, it still would be pretty hard for us to invest in a company in Australia, right? Because they're 12 time zones away, and 17-hour plane ride or something like that. It's hard to manage an investment that's really remote like that. You can do it. Sometimes we've been able to take advantage of local people with other work for other parts of GE, or even for our business, we do have some people in some places like that. But it's still tough. And honestly, just if you look at where are the centers of innovation, most of the companies that we see, they're in North America and Western Europe and Israel. 90%, 85% of those jobs. So the universe of foregone opportunities is relatively small.
Andrew's got a question too.
Yeah, no, but
we could keep taking questions.
Yeah, okay. So go ahead.
I'm curious, John, your perspective on the residential energy efficiency sector. You said you worked for quite a bit in that area and that you found a number of difficulties, and I'm kind of wondering what you learned and if you think there's much greater market opportunity now, if there's been a fundamental shift, or if you think there's still a lot of issues that have yet to be resolved.
There's still a lot of issues, and it has nothing to do with the technology or what our understanding of what we need to do to a home to make it energy efficient. It's really in the interaction between the efficiency provider and the homeowner, and who makes the first investment, if you will, in figuring out what needs to be done. It's the cost of doing the assessment prior to actually doing an intervention or taking a measure in a home. I mean, it could be several $100s, and the homeowner is often reluctant to do that. Say, well, I don't know what I'm going to get. Or use a paper that says spend more money. And the provider is unwilling to invest that sort of, saying my cost of sales is going to go through the roof because I have no guarantee that I'm going to get this in. And trying to figure out how to get over that hurdle is really tough. I mean, the one place that it seems to have worked is where some third party who has an interest in efficiency comes forward and offers some sort of incentive. Oftentimes it's utility, sometimes it's government that does that. It's a real hard area for a business person. Yeah, I'm going to make my business in retrofitting energy efficiency in residential market.
And I can just add to that, I actually spent like a year trying to figure out how to finance energy efficiency retrofits.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's a very hard thing to do for a lot of technical reasons I won't get into. But so that's one of the issues is a lot of customers they say, okay, this might be I might get a 5-year payback if I do this upgrade to my house, but I need to buy a new car. So I don't have money, and my mortgage is underwater, so I don't have any equity that I can tap into. I don't want to put it on my credit cards. So financing it, even though it might be a really good investment, financing it is tough. And financing it, with financial structures, there's a lot, and not just for residential, but for businesses, for commercial real estate, for industry. There are people who have tried to come up with essentially again business model innovations for how could you do that in ways that fit with the customer's needs. Fit with how they do their accounting and what their credit profile is and the size of the transactions and the kinds of things that they do. So that's an area that's ripe for innovation, but challenging.
It's interesting to look at residential solar and Sunrun and Solar City and lease finance and think about, that's a bigger ticket item now per home, but this is again following on Jigger's innovation, Sun Edison and commercial solar is basically doing residential solar lease. So you just say, we'll put a solar system on your roof, you're paying 120 to Pacific Gas right now, pay 100 to us for the next 20 years. And so we are seeing those kinds of companies. Matter of fact, one of our portfolio companies sold a division to Solar City because they had that internal finance and they were able to scale that much more rapidly. So it's interesting to think about, could you bundle that? I mean, whatever, I'm just thinking aloud, but just because that does seem to be, I know as a homeowner myself, like you could just stop paying Duke Power and pay XYZ solar and efficiency company. I'd be delighted to do so. Yeah.
But there are some characteristics of rooftop solar that make it more amenable to financing. For example, if I wanted to go and upgrade my house, put in insulation and new windows, I could make my house a lot more energy efficient. But I've already got a mortgage on my house, and so I can't finance windows separately from the rest of the house, right? So I can't. If I get a loan from somebody to finance that, it can't be. It can't be. They're not going to have my house as collateral. Somebody else has my house as collateral first. So how do where's the solar panels? They're on my roof. If you don't pay me, I'll come and take them off. Right.
And even the point of most people don't perceive a value to the efficiency upgrade you want to do to your house. And so the resale value of your house doesn't really change. You lower your operating cost. You may be much more comfortable. You may be much healthier.
Although ironically, I think it's probably a much better investment than solar panels.
Oh, it is without a doubt. I mean, I'm in the solar business. I'll tell you, efficiency is a much better investment.
But people can't see efficiency upgrades.
That's right.
They can see the solar panels.
We should.
In your driveway.
If they're eager folks out, we should note PACE, this property assessment for clean energy, which is a way to build it into your tax bill, but
not anymore.
Got hammered by
Freddie Mac.
So it's a long story. Just look up PACE and energy finance, but it would be a way to solve this problem.
All right, Pete.
Got his legs cut out.
This is, I think, mainly for John, but David and Stephen, you may want to jump into. My understanding of the company you work for is you guys are essentially like a systems integrator.
Yeah.
and you're at the, I don't know if you call it the very top end of the value chain or the very bottom end, but you're selling
downstream. Down.
Well, you're selling a solution to the customer, and you're selling the ability to combine, in this case, do solar installations.
Yeah.
So a lot of the risk as far as investing for you is project-related risk, and that's the main thing that you guys will be concerned with. So I wanted to get, with that in mind, some feedback from David and Stephen on, like, as far as your portfolio of investments, it sounds like you shy away from that kind of project, at least just because it's smaller from what you guys would be looking for. Is that any different for you? I mean, I guess percentage-wise, what of the stuff that you guys
project finance.
Yeah. I mean, when you raise like venture capital fund, you put forth certain returns, and those aren't project finance returns. So GE has lots of pockets. We just have one pocket. So they have a project finance pocket and a venture capital pocket, which have different return criteria and risk reward profiles.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, we do a lot of project finance. I mean, $20 billion. It's mostly project finance, right? It's a very different risk reward profile. Project finance. Most project finance investors, lenders and equity investors, are public companies. They don't want to lose principal, right? Because that hits the net income line, and the shareholders don't like that. So, project finance investments typically have very limited downside. Which is one of the reasons we don't like technology risk, and we don't like merchant projects that don't have contracted cash flows. That's the big reason. So we're very unlikely to lose money on a project finance investment. We make a venture capital investment, we know we're probably going to lose money on average on a venture capital investment. So it's a very different risk return profile. Part of that is, we might make a $5 million venture capital investment, and that 5 could turn into 0, and it could turn into 50 or even 500 if we hit a Google. Whereas we might make a $100 million project finance investment, and that might turn into 150 over the 20 years of life of the project. But we're pretty sure it's not going to be less than 100, right? And if it is, if that 100 goes to 0, that's $100 million of less net income for GE, and shareholders care a lot about that. So we can't afford to take those.
Just a follow-up question from you, David. Of your portfolio, does that make sense? You got venture capital and you got your project financing as far as how you guys split it up. How does your portfolio or whatever break down as far as?
It's all venture capital. So we will have companies that we own a stake in, like Community Energy I described earlier, that then will work with a GE to finance one of their projects, and that will be a separate entity. And we will get a development fee. Maybe if we're lucky, we keep a small ownership sliver, but that's totally off the books of corporation, which is where our preferred stock is.
Okay. Guys, let's thank our panel. Thank you very much. That was great.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.